On the Talkback Show, on the radio, or whatever audiovisual device you choose to use. Welcome to the GBC podcast, where we talk about the Packers and our hometown of Green Bay. This is episode 45, created on April 30th, 2023. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me, Jeff in Minnesota, and Neil on the East Coast. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
Hello, gentlemen. Tonight I'm drinking from 903 Brewers, Lonely Hearts Beer Club Reserve Series Stout. Stout aged on brandy-soaked cherry and almonds.
Trying to set a new record for length of beer. So I am having the Black Flag Brewing Company. Today was a good day, and it's actually the West Coast IPA for a great day.
You said that's a Black Flag beer?
Black Flag Brewery.
Slip it in, Neil. My beverage is called a Smith and Kearns. And yes, Jeff, it is creamy and frothy. All right, what are we talking about? It is the NFL draft weekend. We're going to review the draft and not only the players selected, but the undrafted free agents as they have now come in as well. I might talk about jersey numbers a bit, but really, we had our own draft party for the last few days, each of us in our own right. And we're going to talk about it and how things ended up this weekend. So the Green Bay Packers hold on to the number 13 overall pick. They grab an edge rusher out of Iowa. Lucas Van Ness is his name. 6'5", 272 pounds. Neil, what do you like about him?
What I like about him is that the Packers picked him. So that's the most important thing. You know, he's a guy who's consistently been able to get a lot of pressure. You watch some of the video on him, and he clearly generates a lot of power. And that power is especially being driven by his 4.58-40 type speed. So somebody who's really quick. And one of the things that's noteworthy about edge rushers, the things that are most critical for edge rushers being successful, speed is number one. So 40-yard dash is one of the best correlates with success for edge rushers. And this is a position that we absolutely needed. The Packers were 23rd in the NFL last year in pressures. We need to do something that's going to be different. And it's clear that Brian Gutekunst took that as a plan, took advantage of the fact that your best edge rushers are going to be at the top of the draft. A guy who had 74 quarterback pressures in 2021, somebody who's smart, 2 times academic, all Big Ten, but really agile. So somebody who's shown a lot of ability in a lot of different ways. 8 sacks last year. His pass rush productivity was ranked 11th, but of course that doesn't take into account the nature of the competition. So if you go against lower competition, you're going to get a higher rating. Obviously, being in the Big Ten, he's somebody who was going to take in and play against the very highest level of competition.
And from the University of Iowa, it's a Big Ten school. So, we know Wisconsin. Jeff, Minnesota. What do you like about the kid from Iowa?
Well, I know that going up against some of the other offensive linemen who were picked in the first and second round, he had a great deal of success against them.
The video against Peter Skoronski in particular, yeah.
That was beautiful.
So that bodes well. Like you said, the competition, Big Ten, lots of players picked in the first few rounds from the Big Ten this year. Really good showing. I'm going to just throw in my kind of overall impressions here. We didn't know at this point that Rodgers was being traded and kind of how the draft picks. So overall, we went from 10 original draft picks to 13 draft picks. That's just a huge haul. Lots of different positions, but not the positions we were used to seeing, but I think that were expected. I like the fact that they took Lucas Van Ness, an edge rusher, first versus like a running back. Or something like that. And because other teams in the Central did take a running back, that I think helped Lucas fall to 13 for us. And I'm happy that, again, they took him, but then they went on the offensive side of the ball a lot.
My big thing, reading the tea leaves on that 13th overall pick, I think that part of the trade, the Rodgers trade, was essential. When you look at the Jets had the 13th pick. The New England Patriots were picking 14th and Green Bay 15th. I believe that Green Bay had Lucas Van Ness targeted, and I think that somehow they found out that Belichick and the Patriots wanted this kid as well. I think he became coveted in that, early teen spot there, and Green Bay knew they had to trade up to get, they had to get that 13th pick to get ahead of New England. And really my only evidence in that is that as soon as Lucas Van Ness was drafted, the Patriots traded out of the 14th spot. They just said, okay, our guy is not there. We can get someone else. And then the best part of it, the kicker, is they trade with a team that needs an offensive lineman in Pittsburgh because they knew the Jets needed an offensive lineman as well. And I think the last good offensive lineman in the first round anyway was swiped out from underneath the Jets in that first round. So that's a neat conspiracy theory, and I'm going to stick with that until I hear differently, Neil.
That means that between now and when I edit it, that conspiracy theory is going to be overturned if we're going based on last week. So a couple other things about Lucas Van Ness. So the big number that was used for draft analysis here was relative athletic score, or RAS. That was seemingly thrown everywhere in a way that has never really been done before. So it's an overall comparison across both their physical measurements and their measurements in various speed, agility, and strength tests, how they do against other players at that position. I think it's important to remember they're being compared to others at that position. And it was noted that the Packers generally drafted extremely high for RAS this year. Looking at Lucas Van Ness, he had a 9.39 RAS score. So somebody who really looked good from that perspective. One other thing that I really liked about Lucas Van Ness is, of course, he's got some sort of Wisconsin connections. He was celebrating in Walworth County, Wisconsin, and Fontana, Wisconsin, where I've got family from, on draft night. So we saw multiple celebrations, but that was one that was the first one that sort of said, hey, this is a Packers guy. Two minor concerns about Lucas Van Ness, and I think that they sort of get into why the Packers drafted him, and I think it goes into their draft philosophy overall. So Lucas Van Ness was actually never a starter at the University of Iowa. He only played 846 career sacks. And so he does not have that same level of work as some of the other players that were picked higher than him. You know, he was not the first or second edge rusher that was chosen. But I think a lot of what the Packers did this year is that they were looking at potential. And that's part of what the RAS, I think that sort of tells you that they were picking potential for some of the players that they've shown certainly flashes. And again, that play against Skoronski was incredible, and he's had a number of really good things. But there's definitely something where there's room for him to grow and room for him to get better. And Peter actually said that in his draft guide, that the best days for Lucas Van Ness are ahead of him. And so I think that's something that's very promising for us as Packers fans.
Neil, I'm glad you brought up that tidbit about him not starting in Iowa, because that really is one of the first things that came out online. And, you know, I'm not picking on you here, Neil, but there are people who it never fails. They have to find something negative because they just want to complain. And bringing up that Van Ness did not start in Iowa. Well, that's just the Iowa way. Kirk Ferentz, as a coach, rewards his senior players by giving them the start. Really, in Iowa, being a starter means your name gets announced during the introductions. That's great. You know, being the guy who gets to run out of the tunnel when your name is getting announced during introduction. So not a starter, but he still has 846 snaps in his career at Iowa. He was still unilaterally revered to be a top 20 or even top 15 pick. So to say, well, he was never a starter, that to me, sorry, Neil, that doesn't hold water.
Yeah, but John, you like being contrarian. I, on the other hand, am a scientist.
So do you.
I, on the other hand, am a scientist, and my job as a scientist is to look at both strengths and weaknesses. And I do not need to just rah for whatever our team does. I don't think that's a reasonable approach. And I think that this is not a risk-free pick. I think that's sort of the point that I would make. And I think that that's globally true. But on the other hand, I think that's why we made 13 picks in this draft, right? It's the Wayne Gretzky. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. This is not an exact science. You cannot predict essentially for anybody except for a couple at the very top, the ones that are going to be stars. And so you don't know. And there's an element of gambling that's associated with every draft pick, and their draft pick and the overall approach that Gutekunst took was clearly tremendous upside potential. He looked at people who had the potential to be stars. And I think that's the key for Lucas Van Ness, is he's got tools that give him the potential to be a star. Again, he's only 21 years old as well. But that actually goes to the other concern that I had about Lucas Van Ness, is that he only benched 17 in the bench press. So there were two statistics that correlate with success as edge rushers. One is 40-yard time. The other is bench press. J.J. Watt had a 35 in the bench press. 17 is pretty low. Obviously, the Packers think that this is something that can improve significantly over where he is currently. And I think that that's partly related to in his freshman year at Iowa. He gained 50 pounds. He went from 220 to 270 in his first year at Iowa. And he's clearly got more room to grow, and that potential is, I think, the recurring theme of Brian Gutekunst's draft this year. One other element about the draft this year that was a recurring theme is versatility. So Lucas Van Ness rushed from the B gap, from the interior, about 2/3 of the time, traditional edge about 1/3 of the time. And that sort of ability to move to different positions ends up being true for a lot of players that we drafted this year. And I think that that's something that bodes well. And actually, I'm going to go back to this bench press, right? That he doesn't quite have the overall strength, but remember that power is related to strength time velocity squared. And so you're talking about the velocity mattering a lot, and the strength is only one component to it. So he's a bull rusher. He's got to learn more techniques, but the potential is clearly what we drafted for. He was widely revered as a very good pick. So I'm going to trust the overall sense across the draft boards that this is somebody who is going to grow into that role and have the ability to become a star.
Not only that, though, now they've got, once Rashawn Gary gets back from injury, they've got two super upside. I mean, when Rashawn Gary was picked too, he was kind of a flyer too, right? I mean, he was a first round pick. Oh, he kind of underperformed, but guess what? He played in the Big Ten as well, and he's really grown into the position and has blossomed. So with two really, really speedy edge rushers that can that pick their gap kind of at the line on defense, it's going to be really hard, I think, for our offensive lines to contain both of these speed rush kind of guys. So it creates, and I think that's probably what they're looking at too, is just create a matchup nightmare. Like, okay, pick your poison, right? Which speed rusher are we going to double team, and which guy are we going to either run away from or call a play away from? And so they'll be affecting the game, hopefully, on every snap.
Right from the go. And again, you've been forgetting about Preston Smith, and that's part of the reason why the ability of Van Ness to play on the interior is such a really critical part. We can absolutely overwhelm offensive lines with speed coming from everywhere. So that's a really exciting possibility.
And you're bringing up, Rashawn Gary being on the shelf to start the season, it really increases that immediate impact that you get from Lucas Van Ness. Certainly Preston Smith, JJ Enagbari still there, but it'll be great to see this young man in camp when the time comes. Overall, in the draft, Green Bay had 3 picks in the top 50, which was very exciting as we move into the second round. And the interesting thing about that, Neil, because you like numbers and how things trade out, right? That 46th pick became the 48th pick and then became the 50th pick, but we added 2 more picks later on, which was great. And we still ended up with 3 picks in the top 50. So the 2 kids that they get at number 42, Luke Musgrave, tight end out of Oregon State, and Jaden Reed, a wide receiver out of Michigan State. 2 positions that Packer fans definitely wanted to fill. They wanted some flash, and they want new young targets for our young quarterback, Jordan Love, and I think he got a couple of them there.
Yeah, Luke Musgrave clearly is somebody who's got an incredible amount of athletic ability and has speed. Somebody who's going back to a Jermichael Finley or going further back into a Keith Jackson, right? We need somebody where they're going to be able to stretch the field a little bit from the tight end position, do more than be somebody who's a good blocker who's going to be able to fit into some space. Obviously, replacing Robert Tonyan and Mercedes Lewis is an important part of what's going on. Now, part of that could be done by Josiah DeGuara, but I think the fact that we picked 2 players who are, I think, very complementary to DeGuara says what we were looking for here. And I think both of the tight ends that we picked are very similar. So Musgrave, a 4.61 40, 6'6", 253, RAS of 9.78. So a very high RAS again. Is the basic description of Luke Musgrave was that he's going to be a really good person at stretching the field. He's going to be a downfield threat. He's good at blocking, but he still has work to go as far as his blocking. And kind of related to that, he's a 19 on the bench, but a 36 on the vertical. So somebody who had a lot of speed, has got a lot of physical abilities, and is going to be able to grow into different. He was a willing blocker at Oregon State, notably our first Beaver since 2003 in the draft. So we know our friend Jim is very appreciative of that element. Nick Barnett in 2003. But I think that Luke Musgrave really points to what Brian Gutekunst was looking for, right? He was looking for gems that maybe other people weren't going to find. I mean, he chose to pass over other players that we talked about last week who were potentially rated higher. And I think that they looked at it and said, well, this is a player who in 2021 showed an incredible level of ability, great hands, great release. great catch radius, and missed much of the 2022 season because of an MCL injury. And so probably fell on the draft board because of that MCL. But the nice thing about an MCL injury, is somebody who's had one can attest, is that it's essentially something that will go away. It's not a recurring injury. It's essentially too much stress on the body part, and just essentially rest will take care of it. So I don't think, and clearly the Packers didn't think, that that's a long-term concern of his. And they basically said, hey, this is somebody who should have been drafted higher. If he had had a 2022 season like his 2021, he probably would have been talked about at the end of the first round. And so getting this first round talent in the middle of the second round is clearly a steal. I love the player, and I think that he's somebody we're going to like for a long time.
I think again, the immediate impact is going to be there as well, because up until today, that tight end room was relatively empty. You talked about Josiah DeGuara, but another guy carried over from last season, Tyler Davis, and I don't think Tyler Davis impressed anybody with his hands last year. And then they signed a kid to a futures contract out of the University of St. Thomas, Jeff, a Tommy, if you will.
There we go.
Nick Gutekunst. That signing was so huge that I totally missed it, but Nick is on the team as well. He's 6'5", 247. You like those numbers, but adding tight ends, Jeff, I'll let you talk about how much you love tight ends, right?
You know, it's a very important part. That's what we're looking at here in terms of helping out on the line for blocking. But yeah, stretching the field. I mean, that has not happened. We have not really seen that in years. And slot receiver, okay, fine. We've got now speed with Christian Watson and some of the other receivers from last year. So, okay, what can the tight end do? What, you know, they can block, they can chip. Okay, fine. So if the running play is called, yep, they can hold their own. But guess what? If we can get these mismatches, can he catch 50, 60, 70 balls? Or if he has a 36-inch vertical, just throw it up, how many touchdowns is he going to catch in the red zone, right? I'm hoping that's how they're going to use him.
So since we're talking about tight ends, we'll come back to Jaden Reed in the second round. But in the third round, 78th overall draft pick out of South Dakota State, another tight end, Tucker Kraft. So since we're talking about tight ends, we may as well bring Tucker Kraft into this as well. Now he's 6'5", 259 as well, Neil, but you've just got a whole bunch of tight end information there. I know you want to
another guy who's speedy. In 2021, he had 65 catches. In his career, he had 9 touchdowns. Very much like Luke Musgrave, he missed most of his senior year. He missed 6 games in his senior year because of injury, and so maybe fell on the draft board more than he would have if he had come out a year earlier, for a senior year that was like his junior year. So and this is sort of another one of those players. There were a whole series of players that the Packers chose this year that essentially did not perform at the highest possible level their senior year, were better the year before, and then also looked really, really good at the Senior Bowl. This was a recurring Brian Gutekunst theme, as players who started at the Senior Bowl were certainly more likely to be picked. Tucker Kraft was absolutely somebody who really distinguished himself at the Senior Bowl. I think numerically it's very similar to what you have for Luke Musgrave. His RAS was 9.68. His bench is a little bit higher at 23, vertical a little bit less, but fundamentally somebody who is got a lot of ability to take up space, to grab a ball in contested spaces, but also has some speed to move around. The other thing about South Dakota State is that is also where Dallas Goedert came from. So certainly a place where tight ends have done well historically and have shown that they can perform at the higher level of the NFL.
And how about his draft party?
Timberlake, South Dakota brought it. That could have been any place in Wisconsin, small town Wisconsin, a town of 562 people with the ultimate celebration. It could have been my family's eponymous bar up in northern Wisconsin. It was beautiful. It was really the most beautiful video of the entire night, even including all of the players and how they played.
And I think that he's already kind of got a following, I think, in Green Bay, right? He's moving to the big city of Green Bay. So therefore, but I think he'll be fully embraced small town guy. And like I said, from that, based on the Twitterverse and things like that already, I think lots of folks are going to be excited for Tucker Kraft to be a Packer.
2 more notes about Luke Musgrave. So his, in this RAS, one of the things that comes out is what is their fastest 10-yard split. in the 40-yard dash. And Luke Musgrave's 154 was actually the third fastest of any player drafted by the Packers this year, just slightly behind a couple of the D-backs that were chosen. So somebody who, has got that ability to build up really high levels of speed in his game. So, breakaway speed is the sort of thing that you're talking about here. The other thing is he's the highest tight end chosen by the Packers since Bubba Franks in 2000. Bubba obviously providing a lot of successful years for us.
Everybody needs a Bubba.
So in that second round then, so we had the 46th pick, as we mentioned earlier, traded down to 48 and then to 50. And I kind of have a feeling there that Brian Gutekunst knew who his guy was going to be with that second round pick. And he did his little magic and picked up a couple of more Saturday picks for us and had Jayden Reed targeted. So Jayden Reed, the wide receiver out of Michigan State. Now he's a little bit undersized, if you will. He's 5'11", 187 pounds. But I think we're looking at speed there as well, right, Neil?
Yeah, I mean, he was timed at the combine at 4:45, but the Packers actually timed him at a 4:37 for his speed. So somebody who's really fast. He was actually the second fastest 10-yard split of anyone we had. But, he's somebody who has a much more complete package. So he started out at Western Michigan, played 1 year there as a starter, then went on to Michigan State. And overall in his career, almost 3,000 yards receiving, over 200 receptions, 26 touchdowns. But going into what I think was a theme of the draft this year is I've become convinced that Rich Bisaccia is now our head coach and general manager, because seemingly almost everyone that we picked had some sort of special teams accolades. So Lucas Van Ness, just going back to the first round, he had 2 blocked punts in his college career. Jayden Reed had 44 punt returns, 3 for touchdowns, as well as a bunch of kickoff returns. He's somebody who certainly is going to be able to help Keyshawn Nixon, especially if Keyshawn Nixon is going to be doing more work in the secondary this year. He's got those abilities to be an absolute star on those special teams, known for his quick first step, known for his ability to fight for the football. There were some great videos available of how even in tightly contested spaces, his speed and his ability to take up space, despite his, in theory, being undersized, was something that was an asset as far as he was concerned. One thing about Jayden Reed, though, is that his RAS was actually one of the lowest for the Packers drafted this year, 6.74. But I think that points, so Gutekunst overall was clearly looking at RAS, but RAS is just looking at measurable numbers. It tells you nothing about football per se. And yes, having freak athleticism is good, but he was certainly downgraded based on his size in those measurements. And I will just note that 2 of the most successful, 2 of the best recent Packers, David Bakhtiari had an RAS of 6.72. Devontae Adams had an RAS of 6.54. I think you can get away with that. I think it's not just that RAS number that matters.
So I think at the end of the day, Friday, Packer fans as a whole, I think we're satisfied with those 4 picks, 4 out of the top 100 or 4 in the top 78. Pretty nice. And then getting those positions of need, 2 tight ends and a wide receiver. Certainly did wonders for how we were feeling going into Saturday. Now, Saturday, because of those trades, they had 9 picks on Saturday. There were some teams that didn't even have 9 at all. And I kind of equate those 9 picks on Saturday. There was one year where my daughters, for Christmas, they got so many presents that they got bored opening them. They wanted to start playing with their toys that they got before all the presents were open. I kind of felt the same way with going through Saturday. It was like, wow, how many do we have left? How many do we have left?
John,
well,
I'm going to tell you this. I did not get bored. I loved it. I absolutely enjoyed all of the picks that we had. And, of course we know that not all of them are going to succeed, but you can see exactly why all of them, maybe almost all of them, were taken. You know where the connection was that was going to do this. You start out with Colby Wooden, right? 6'4", 273. We've got his picture here. Is sporting the cheese as part of this. Somebody who is fast, somebody who was a starter for 3 years in Auburn, so not a small program as far as his success rate. 15 sacks, 30 tackles for loss, 3 forced fumbles, a blocked field goal. So Rich Bisaccia is happy again. RAS 9.24. This is somebody who's got that sort of level of versatility that is going to serve him well within that adaptable line. And I think that if you think about some of the concepts that teams like to do that are successful on defense, right? They like to move players around in order to create mismatches. And we've got players that can play inside, they can play outside. The ability to create mismatches is something that we are building on. And again, that goes to the overall theme of versatility as far as the players that we drafted this year.
Well, I was able to hear we'll call it press conference. So Joe Barry had some time in front of the media after this pick of Colby Wooden. And yeah, you talked about his size for a defensive lineman. He's probably a little bit smaller because you think you want to have guys 300 pounds or heavier there. But what Joe Barry was stating is that this player plays to the new or current philosophy of let's get speed on defense. And I say, sign me up, because I've been saying that for 10 years. This defense has always been a half step to a full step behind. If you can give me all the speed on defense, I will take it.
Right. I mean, there was some great videos shown of him grabbing runners, grabbing quarterbacks from behind, essentially catching up to fast guys. 4.79 is it's not outrageous speed, but on the other hand, he's got enough speed in order to do that as a defensive lineman. And yes, that movement around and that ability to overwhelm with speed seems to be the theme of the Packers, the way they're building the team right now.
So Wooden, our only 4th round pick. Let's take a look at the 5th round. 2 picks in the 5th round, both on the offensive side in your skill positions. At number 149, quarterback out of Penn State, Sean Clifford. I don't think that Sean's going to be competing for the starting job, but it'll be a nice guy to have in camp. Let him and Danny Etling vie for that number 2 spot. But then at 159 overall, a wide receiver out of the University of Virginia, Dontavian Wicks. What do you got on Dontavian Wicks, Neil?
This is one who screams out potential, screams out. He's shown flashes of being incredible. Dontavian Wicks is another one of these players that maybe disappointed in 2022, but had a truly spectacular 2021 season. And if we're talking about players that maybe there's a native athletic ability that maybe lost a little bit or didn't allow itself to be shown, this is another one of those players. So in 4 seasons at the University of Virginia, he had 19 starts, over 1,600 yards passing, 12 touchdowns. He missed 2020 with injury. He missed a couple games in 2022 with injury, but the biggest knock against him in 2022 was his drops. He dropped 23% of the passes that were directed to him in that year. He led Virginia in drops. And so the question is, well, is that the real Dontavian Wicks? Or is that player that he was in 2021, where he was all ACC, where he was first team ACC, where he really showed this incredible ability to move the ball downfield, but also to play to the outside? And I think that's the real question. There's, even with the injury at the combine, he clocked a 4.62 at the combine, but he had a hip injury at the combine, did 4.57 in his pro day. But a different type of receiver, certainly, than we had earlier, 6'1", 206. And talk about his large catch radius, talk about how he's got the ability to catch the deep pass. He essentially changed the way Virginia played the game with the deep pass that year. RAS of 9.17, 39-inch vertical. So this upside potential clearly is what we're going for here. And I think that sort of goes the whole thing that we talked about earlier, that fundamentally we don't need all of these guys to hit. We just need some of them to hit, and some of them have that ability. They all have the ability to hit. We know they're not all going to. We don't really care who does, because we've got enough picks in this draft that some of them are going to work out and they're going to be really, really good.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's believing that all 13 of these players are going to be studs on this, but yeah, you throw enough shit at the wall and something's going to stick, right?
And I don't think this is shit that we're throwing on the wall either. So, of course, the other direction is Sean Clifford, who screams everything except tremendous upside potential. I think Sean Clifford was chosen clearly as somebody who is going to be competent in a backup quarterback role. He's 111 days older than Jordan Love, because he was a 6-year player, 6-year plan for Sean Clifford at Penn State. But good physical, measurable, 6'2", 218, fast, 4.62. In 4 years as a starter at Penn State, he threw 86 touchdown passes, 61% completions. And so he also rushed and had 15 touchdowns rushing. So he's got an ability to be good. I think when you talk to Penn State fans, their biggest concern is his lack of consistency, that sometimes he looked like the best quarterback in the Big Ten. Other times he looked like he shouldn't have even been starting. But there is something to be said that he's got at least enough ability to be good. And one of the things that was also noted about him is he's really smart. And so he's going to have that ability to fill in, that ability to contribute in the quarterbacking room in a way that is not going to be typical of a lot of quarterbacks. And I think there's something to be said for, yes, he beat out Will Levis. Will Levis transferred to Kentucky specifically because of Sean Clifford. He was 3 times all Big Ten. He has the Penn State records in passing yards and several other categories. So, I mean, he's somebody who was at a top school and somebody who performed at a very high level, maybe not ever looking like a superstar for extended stretches, but somebody who kind of fits that role. I think Peter talked about it last week, of somebody who's not going to be a competitor for Jordan Love, but somebody who will be able to do the job when he's called upon.
Well, not only that, but a peer, right? I mean, so they're basically about the same age, coming at it from 2 completely different ways. But I think it is fascinating too that Will Levis was his backup, not for 1 year, but for 2 years. So he, quarterback competition, he was better than Will Levis, who ended up getting, drafted in the top of the 2nd round. I think this is one of these picks where it's like, it's a character pick, right? It's going to be, this is for the overall betterment of the team. Is he going to start? Probably not. That's not why he was picked. But again, he's a peer, he's a contemporary of Jordan Love, but Jordan Love has been a pro for a number of years now. Sean Clifford has not. So I think it's an interesting thing, maybe a comfort, just so that everybody in the quarterback room can move forward without any egos, nobody worrying about whose job is going to be what. I think that's already set, and just move forward.
I don't even know that it's that. I think that the Packers clearly, I mean, they had options for other quarterbacks when they picked him, and they were clearly concerned about there being a run on quarterbacks, is why they picked him before people thought that he was going to be picked. But, he does have physical abilities. His RAS was 9.04. So he has a lot of athletic ability. And I think that they didn't want some of the other quarterbacks that may have been better pocket quarterbacks, but were essentially going to be immobile. This is somebody who's going to be playing in a style, or capable of playing a style, that is like the way that Jordan Love plays if he is called upon. And we certainly can't count on Jordan Love being a Brett Favre as far as longevity is concerned or endurance is concerned. We have to assume he's going to miss some games. And this is somebody who they clearly think is going to be able to be plugged in and be able to play a similar type of game as what Jordan Love is playing.
There has to be something that they did see in Sean Clifford to say, let's bring this kid in, because he's not really, wasn't really on any draft boards, really didn't have a lot of ratings, wasn't expected to be picked. But, we also talked about this in the last episode. Any quarterback that they draft has to have, I guess, that ability with his ego to understand he's not coming in to compete for the number 1 spot. He's coming in to learn, and he's going to develop, and where he goes from there is going to be what he puts into it. And I think that probably is something that they saw in Sean Clifford as well, which, you talk about him being smart. I think that's a definite credit for him and for that quarterback room.
And kind of getting back to the Packer philosophy when Brett Favre was quarterback, drafting quarterbacks to use them as draft capital a few years down the road too. If they do have good preseasons, if they do in a mop-up role, or in a, if Jordan Love, God forbid, gets hurt, shows some ability, then draft capital as well for trade capital for potential future drafts.
I may be biased, but yes, I liked the Ron Wolf, Mike Holmgren philosophy of drafting a quarterback every year, regardless. So it's good to see, someone that you bring in. It's not a throwaway 7th round pick. It's not here's an undrafted guy, let's hope this works out. No, I think they put some time and effort into, investing the 5th round pick.
But I'm glad they didn't go with the Brian Brom type approach here either.
Right.
So
moving into the 6th round, 2 picks in the 6th round. The 179th overall pick, a defensive lineman out of Bowling Green in Carl Brooks. And then a kicker comes in the 6th round, Anders Carlson out of Auburn. And he's a big kid, 6'5", 219 pounds. And we're going to see how strong his leg is.
So if there were a Twitter consensus, Packers Twitter consensus for what was the favorite pick of the draft, I think it's going to be Carl Brooks. And I think if there were a consensus for the least favorite pick of the draft, it would be Anders Carlson. You can see why they did the latter as well. So Carl Brooks, I agree. I just love what he did. This is not a pick that was made based on potential. This is a guy who was incredibly productive in 5 seasons in Bowling Green, 27 and a half sacks, 6'3", 296, somebody who primarily was working from on the interior of the line, but also somebody who just has incredible explosion off the ball despite not having an incredible 40 time. He's somebody clearly who's got the ability. He was somebody who was predicted to be in the 4th or the 5th round. We got him in the 6th round. Some people even said he should have gone in the 3rd round. And so this is somebody who clearly a lot of people had thought highly of. And in his college career, he had almost 2,400 snaps on the Bowling Green defense, 46 tackles for losses, interceptions, 6 forced fumbles, somebody who just looked like a man among boys in that conference. He was somebody who was incredibly successful as well. And in that 2022 season, among all edge rushers, he was 1st in PFF run grade, and he was 6th in PFF win rate in passing. So somebody who performed and got really high numbers. Now, again, those win rates and those run grades are also not taking into account what the competition is, but somebody who was consistent and somebody who was good against the pass, somebody who was good against the run. He weighs essentially 300 pounds. He will fit in well in the middle, but also capable of running near the edge. And so specifically in his college career, 700 snaps at the interior tackle, 1,400 plus at the edge. So again, another one of these versatile players who can move inside and out in order to get things done. RAS 5.87. This again goes to, well, you can look at production or you can look at statistics on measurables. Clearly, the Packers looked at what he actually did playing the football game. And he did have a 28 in the bench. So a decent number as far as the bench. He's got power, he's got decent speed, but more importantly, he's got that productivity. He's another one of those players who also performed in the Senior Bowl and looked really good against the good competition within the Senior Bowl. One other note about Karl Brooks: of all of the players who were drafted, there were only a handful that were not invited to the combine. Karl Brooks and Sean Clifford were 2 of them. Fundamentally, he knows that why he was not chosen to go to the combine, but he's got all of the ability. There are a lot of people who really like what he's doing, and I'm really looking forward to seeing him within that rotation on the defensive line.
So, Jeff, I don't know if you specifically remember this, but I know Minnesota Vikings fans will. Daniel Carlson, the kicker for the Vikings, who didn't last very long and missed a few key field goal attempts against Green Bay, is the older brother of Anders Carlson. And yes, I think indeed. The review on the younger Carlson as well. Strong leg, but inconsistent accuracy. And Vikings fans will say that accuracy is something that is probably more important than anything else when it comes to a kicker.
Yeah, this is one where, again, general manager Rich Bisaccia, I'm sure, had an influence on this pick. A couple years ago, his accuracy was very, very, very good. And yes, last year his accuracy was not good at all, or last couple of years. You know what? We'll see what happens. I think, there's still a possibility where Mason Crosby comes back. This at least gives Mason Crosby some competition. Again, a kicker, right? So 6th round for a kicker, maybe a little early, maybe not.
I actually disagree with that. I really liked what we did with really loading up on 5th, 6th, and 7th round draft picks, because you just don't know who you're going to be able to sign if they make it to the undrafted free agent. Yeah. And so I think that there's somebody who said that if there's somebody that you think is going to be good enough, it's only a 6th round pick. It's not a huge deal in order to do that. And, could we have used one of the 7ths on him? Yeah, but clearly Brian Gutekunst said, well, there's no real difference between this and he thinks all the people that he wanted there would have also been available in the 7th. So, but I think, going back to general manager Rich Bisaccia, right? Rich Bisaccia did coach his brother for 4 years in Oakland. Yep. So,
and, he'll be obviously coaching him as the kicker now in special teams, but you wonder, okay, he's from Auburn. So has he really kicked in bad weather, cold weather, things like that? Probably not. That's kind of the only concern that I had, is that, he wasn't kicking in the snow and the cold, maybe in the Big Ten or something like that.
But he has kicked in some high pressure games, and he's made some kicks in high pressure games. So
kicking is kicking. All right. Let's take a look at the 7th round, kind of as a whole. 4 picks in a span of 25 slots. Carrington Valentine, a cornerback out of Kentucky. Lou Nichols III, a running back out of Central Michigan. Anthony Johnson Jr., finally a safety being drafted out of Iowa State. And Grant Dubois is another wide receiver out of Charlotte, wrapping up the Packers draft. Safety, definitely a position that I think we felt was a position of need here. Getting a running back. Do we need a running back? No, but is it nice to have a 3rd running back on the roster? You bet. Cornerback in Valentine. I said it last time, you can never have too many cornerbacks. And then another receiver in Dubois, a guy who's 6'3", 200 pounds, and Looked like he is getting rated pretty well here for being a late 7th-round draft pick.
I think people universally loved our 7th-round picks. I mean, at least as far as the people that I read, which granted that's biased towards people whose writing I generally like, but still, I mean, you take Carrington Valentine, right? So 4:44 in the 40. He's actually the fastest combine time of any player we drafted this year. And he also had a 152 in that 10-yard maximum speed. That was also the fastest of any player that we drafted this year. He's somebody with an RAS of 8.30, a vertical of 39, led Kentucky in pass breakups last year with 11. He was Mel Kiper's best available player for a while when the Packers drafted him early in the 7th round. So somebody that obviously people think a lot of. Going back to the Rich Bisaccia theme, he was known as being a really good special teams player as well. But I think that, yes, we've got to the overall theme that people were talking about as far as, well, why didn't we pick a bunch of safeties or whatever, is that, well, we don't need backup safeties. We've got a lot of backup safeties on the team already. We need players who are capable of starting. And Valentine obviously played at cornerback, but we know how there's fluidity in these positions, and Valentine's somebody who's got really strong talent. Anthony Johnson was the other player that people loved, looking at somebody who was a safety his senior year, but somebody who played cornerback the 4 years before that, a 5-year player at Iowa State, another player who was really good at the Senior Bowl, but people really liked talking about his leadership, the fact that he was a captain for 2 years. I think the Packers liked his versatility and the fact that he's going to be able to figure out the corner of the safety because he's played all of those before. And he also is good playing against the run. So he's 26th in PFF run stop rate for safeties this year out of 200 players. So somebody who's able to do the pass and the run, is able to move around. A good RAS over 8, vertical of 37.5, and somebody who also played 386 special team snaps. So is going to be able to, like every player that we're drafting, seemingly be able to play on special teams as well. But I think the big thing is he's known as a really good character guy. And the video that everyone loves is the one where one of the other D-backs was beaten. He runs down the field and sort of in an anti-Leon Lett situation, strips the ball away at the 1-yard line and prevents a touchdown that actually leads to them winning the game. So somebody who's never going to give up on the play. So character guys who also are really fast and have strong abilities are always going to be welcomed on the Packers.
So are we looking at a complete overhaul here of the ass hats?
I hope so.
Look at, I mean, almost every player we've talked about has had, again, general manager Rich Bisaccia.
Somebody tuning in late is going to go, why do these guys think Rich Bisaccia is the general manager?
But that's how we drafted. So
are the ass hats going to be, a thing of the past here, because we're going to have starting players, good, fast starting players playing on special teams as well? I don't know, but that's a recurring theme here.
So let me just give you one Rich Bisaccia as the GM stat. So 5 of the 13 players that we drafted either blocked a punt or returned a punt for a touchdown in their college years. 5 of 13.
That's
a special,
statistically significant number.
Yeah, and speed also being a theme there.
Yeah,
and all of these players having some type of special teams experience. So
so another guy who had speed. So we drafted Lou Nichols III, and a decent running back, but especially known for how well he has vision when he sees space in the field. Knows how to plant. But specifically in FBS in 2021, he led FBS in rushing with 1,848 yards. Another player who had a down year in 2022, but he had a hamstring injury that sort of slowed him down. But somebody who was a top rusher in the 2021 season, also had 71 catches in his college career. So he's going to be able to run, he's going to be able to catch, he's going to be able to do all of the things that you expect a Packers running back to be able to do.
And I still want to see a gadget play. John, you had mentioned this during draft day, love to Valentine or Valentine to love. I don't know what's going to happen. He plays on the defense, but maybe like some wildcat formation. I don't know. Something we gotta. I hope they can make that happen.
But Grant Dubose is somebody who people have talked about as far as gadget plays are concerned as well, and another tall, large receiver, 457.40, but again, tied with that 152 10-yard thing. Dubose and Nichols and Valentine and Anthony Johnson, all above 8 on their RAS for 7th-round draft picks. So clearly going after pure athleticism, knowing that these guys are, at best a 50-50 shot, maybe really more like a 1 in 4 shot, but you got 4 shots at 1 in 4. All of them are highly athletic. There's a chance that one of them is going to be really good, sort of like a Donald Driver 7th-round draft pick, who was obviously one of the greats of all time for the Packers.
So 13 overall draft picks during the NFL draft. And as soon as the draft is over, the race is on to get some of those guys that you've looked at that you'd like to have in camp. So the undrafted free agents are still being announced coming in. There's going to be a lot of bodies in camp when they get the roster up to 90. We don't need to go over all of them, but Neil, there was one in particular who caught your eye. He was a big kid.
Well, one of the things that was noted during the draft this year is that we did not draft any offensive linemen for the first time in quite a while. Now, that speaks perhaps to the strengths that we already have. We've drafted a lot of offensive linemen in recent years, but I think from my perspective, it speaks to the fact that the Packers actually think that Sean Rhyan is not going to be a 3rd-round bust, but that he's actually going to be able to contribute after an exceedingly nondescript first year on the Packers. Because if they were concerned about him, I think they would have drafted somebody in the regular draft. But they did end up signing an undrafted free agent who was projected to be selected near the end of the draft. And that's Kadeem Telfort of University of Alabama, Birmingham, an offensive tackle, a monster of man, 6'8", 320 pounds. That was the one undrafted free agent signing that he's the one that certainly excited me the most as far as, I don't know that he's going to make the team or not, but he's somebody who people looked at and regarded highly. And I think that he's going to certainly provide competition to make sure that none of those backup linemen are going to be comfortable that they're going to, the Packers didn't draft anyone, we're going to make the team. No, there are going to be people that are going to be pushing you as well. And I think that this is a guy that has that potential, if not to make the roster. Certainly he's got the potential to be a practice squad player who might contribute in future years. I think the other thing about the undrafted free agents is just sort of looking at what positions were chosen. We still signed 2 more tight ends as undrafted free agents, and we signed 2 wide receivers as undrafted free agents. And I think that says that while we sort of know who the top couple are going to be at both of those position groups, but certainly at the bottom, there are openings for people who are going to insert themselves. And whether it's somebody who's currently on the roster or somebody who's got the ability to jump their way into the roster, there's going to be flexibility and openings for making your contributions if you are that type of player.
And with that, so the players that came in, so right now the Green Bay Packers announced the 4 players drafted in the first 3 rounds have been already given their jersey numbers. So Lucas Van Ness, who wore number 91 in college, well, that number is kind of being used right now. Preston Smith has that. So Lucas got jersey number 90. The tight ends that we talked about, so Luke Musgrave gets number 88. Neil, you mentioned Bubba Franks, but also Jermichael Finley wore that number. So 88, kind of a tight end number in Green Bay, but also, Jeff, number 85. The body's not even cold on Robert Tonyan. And Tucker Kraft.
So Jeff's in mourning jersey, right now.
Right?
That's fine. I think, like I said, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of Tucker Kraft jerseys that I think he's going to endear himself to the Packer faithful.
Well, talk about jerseys, though. I was fully prepared to get a number 1 Jaden Reed jersey, and here's why. So the Green Bay Packers have never officially retired jersey numbers 1 nor 5. Number 5, Paul Hornung's number has been worn since Hornung. Don Mikowski and Vince Ferragamo wore number 5 in the mid-'80s. But Curly Lambeau's jersey number 1, this is something that's so interesting about this jersey number. Lambeau wore it only in the 1925 and 1926 seasons. And there's not even really any photographic evidence of him wearing it. He's just always been credited as jersey number 1. The thing about Curly Lambeau is he's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame as a coach, not as a player. And that's just one of those things that jersey number just has never been assigned. It's been worn in preseason games, but not in the regular season. And I think after 100 years or almost 100 years, I think we can put the number back into circulation. I was so stoked. I was so excited to see Jaron Reed with a number 1. And it even came out on the official Packers website, their Twitter feed and everything, that they were giving him that number. And I don't know what happened. They had a change of heart. He is now going to be wearing number 11. But like I said, I've said this before, I'll say it again. In those premium numbers between 1 and 19, if you've got 6 of those numbers that you've taken out of circulation, That's 33% of the numbers there. Put 1 and 5 back in circulation. I think it's been long enough, especially on number 1. Number 5 never officially got retired. We can see players wearing those 2 numbers as well.
Well, speaking of numbers, so this draft, there was a lot of 13s. 13 players drafted. There were overall, the Packers this is only the 4th time in their history that they've drafted for 13th. The other times it's been a generation. 1959, Alex Hawkins, a halfback out of South Carolina. 1964, a gentleman by the name of Lloyd Voss from Nebraska. And in 1966, Gail Gillingham, a tackle from Minnesota. There were some other firsts I just wanted that I was reading and I thought was kind of interesting. And all the clamor and all the years of the Favres and the Aaron Rodgers and get them some weapons. So in 2023, the first time the Packers have drafted multiple tight ends within the first 3 rounds in the common draft era. That's since 1967. Also the first time selecting 3 pass catchers in the common draft era. So we have this definite shift. I mean, they've been drafting defense for years now. So let's give Jordan Love some toys to play with. With the kicker, they hadn't drafted a kicker since 2007. Then that's when they drafted Mason Crosby. Yep, that worked out okay. Is Mr. Carlson going to be around for another decade and a half or more? We'll see. A lot of these positions, it had been a while since they were drafted, and a number of years, kind of some gaps, and they really want offense. So I think that's pretty exciting. We'll see how this turns out. I don't think like last year where everybody made the team. Remember that? Every draft pick made the team. Probably not all 13 of these players are going to, but I think the preseason, the competition, I think that's also another thing. They're really looking to up the competition here, especially on the offensive side of the ball, and we'll see what happens.
Overall, Neil, though, like you said, we certainly liked our draft picks, and everything you read seemed pretty favorable overall for the Green Bay Packers draft.
Yeah, I mean, the overall numbers, right? Draft grades, of course, we know are meaningless, but the fact is that the consensus among writers who put out draft grades is they put us pretty high. Some people put us the best. We were certainly consensus, typically top 5 or top 10 among the teams as far as the drafting is concerned. So we just had this excitement when we were talking in our text thread that we had a bunch of needs and we addressed the needs in this draft, and we addressed them not just with one person, but essentially for every need we had, we put multiple people out there such that we're going to have bodies that are likely going to be successful.
Yeah, historically so. I mean, like I said, they have not drafted like this in a really, really long time. So we'll see. Hopefully it'll pay off.
Regardless of those irrelevant draft grades, Jeff, though, you found a team that did not get graded very well.
Well, no, John, that is a true statement. So, it's know your adversary. That's very important. I was taking a look. So I started looking at the Vikings draft. And so overall, they only picked 6 players. So this was, whether you're a local, whether you're a sports writer, whatever, everybody's really shaking their head on this one. Just like, kind of what the hell were they thinking? In the first round, the Vikings took a stud wide receiver. Well, they sort of already have at least one of those already, right? I mean,
well, they got to give Kirk Cousins some weapons because his Super Bowl window is closing. So, got to get Kirk Cousins those weapons for his Super Bowl.
Well, I guess so. There's a guy by the name of Justin Jefferson, who, oh, by the way, he's pretty good. So they go out and, again, I guess in the spirit of best available player, they pick up a guy by the name of Jordan Addison, wide receiver from USC, with the 19th overall pick. So then they don't have a second round pick, and they come back in the 3rd round. And one of their big needs is cornerback. Well, there's reaching, and then there's this pick. So they pick a guy by the name of Mekhi Blackman, cornerback, also from USC. So they had 6 total picks from 4 different schools only, which is kind of interesting. So this cornerback, also from USC, he was kind of projected like in the 6th or 7th round. Yeah, the Vikings picked him in the 3rd round. So based on need. So they didn't pick somebody in the 1st round. but then the best available, but then they didn't pick the best available. They picked for need in the 3rd round. They picked a safety in the 4th round, a gentleman by the name of Jay Ward from LSU. And then also from LSU in the 5th round, a defensive tackle, Jacqueline Roy. Then they had another 5th round pick, a guy by the name of Jaron Hall, quarterback, BYU. So is this the Kirk Cousins heir apparent, picked in the 5th round? We'll see. He got some solid grades at BYU and was expected to be drafted, round 4th, 5th round maybe, but so that's perhaps Kirk Cousins heir apparent.
No, I'm gonna jump in on this one and say not, because right when you got into the 3rd day of the draft, I started looking at the quarterbacks that were available and thought about, well, who might the Packers choose? And I said last week that I would prefer Stetson Bennett, but that was mainly because I wanted him as a good, ready backup, not because I thought of his long-term potential, although I do think he's a good choice for the Rams. But looking at who the Packers could have chosen, I mean, I didn't like any of those quarterbacks that were available. I like the Stanford quarterback the most of all of them, but all of them had significant weaknesses, and you can see why they weren't early picks in the draft. And the fact is, Tom Brady and Bart Starr are anomalies. Great quarterbacks come from early rounds of the draft. So I feel good that the Vikings used one of their 6 picks on a quarterback that is probably not going to do very much.
And then their last pick in the 7th round, a gentleman by the name of Dwayne McBride, running back from UAB. So curious, with all the offensive line issues that the Vikings have had to protect Kirk Cousins and the run game and things like that, just like the Packers, they don't pick any offensive tackles, any offensive linemen at all. Yeah, the grades there, some head scratchers. I know that there were one of the other head scratchers, Neil, was also in our division. The Detroit Lions go out, and who do they pick in the 1st round?
Running back. I'm so happy that the Falcons and Lions chose running backs, because I don't think that Van Ness falls to us unless they do. So, although I will say the Lions overall did generally get very good grades after that 1st pick of the draft, and somewhat disconcertingly, the Bears got among the best grades in the overall draft this year. So, and the Bears basically took the same approach the Packers did, that they took a lot of draft picks, they traded down, and they were able to pick up players that would fill needs that they had for the team. So they still have Justin Fields as their quarterback. So, I mean,
they do.
And they're still the Bears, but at least from their perspective, they did things that were things that smart teams did. And the Lions, after the 1st round, I think generally did things that smart teams do. But, kind of pissing away your 1st round pick for a running back is maybe not a thing a smart team does. And, maybe there's time for regression for the Lions this year after their overachieving season last year.
Based on the, again, the draft, win the Super Bowl in the, drafting or anything like that, or in the preseason, as we've talked about. But man, for the conference champions or for the NFC North champion Minnesota Vikings, yikes, not a solid draft. So we'll see what this brings.
I mean, there was one analysis that I heard that sort of fits sort of what my overall approach is, but I'd never heard it stated quite this way. And that a good draft is one in which you get 3 starters. A great draft is one in which you get 4 starters out of it. And going back to what the Packers have, I certainly see the potential for a truly great draft. And we've had a lot of not good drafts for a while now. So it's going to be good to see this group develop, see this young group develop as far as playmakers that we have.
I think it's exciting, because I think here we're really going to see why Matt LaFleur perhaps was hired, right? So a great young mind, a great football mind. He's got a bunch of kids now to coach, right? I mean, your Hall of Fame quarterback is gone. Whatever Aaron Rodgers was doing or saying with the organization, whether it was in the meeting rooms or otherwise, he's gone. That voice is gone. That presence is gone, for good or for bad. Therefore, it's back to the coaching staff, quite simply, to mold this group of young players, pretty inexperienced, but you know what? If they can, start fast, if they can get hot, I think that success is going to beget success here, because they do have some solid veterans, obviously, as well, on the defensive side of the ball. Hopefully they will not underachieve like they did last year, at least on the defensive side of the ball. And, with a solid running back core and an offensive line, like I said, they didn't add anybody, at least in the, through the first 7 rounds. So I think it's going to be not an experiment, but certainly a work in progress. But like I said, this is where Matt LaFleur, we're going to find out really what kind of coach he is. If he can really, an offensive mind, is he, a Sean McVay, where he can just like make instant offense, or at least with all these talented players, as we've talked about, versatile players. Can they play it? They match up nightmares. They're doing weird things, that hopefully will work on the offensive and perhaps on the defensive side of the ball. That's where you get the weird matchups. That's where you get the mismatches, and that's hopefully where we get the wins.
Going on to that youth theme, Aaron Jones is 28, Josiah DeGuara is 26. Every other skilled player is 25 or under on the Packers offense. This is a young team. This is a team that is going to grow together. I'm excited about our future.
Talking about exciting, Neil, the NFL draft really is the most wonderful time of the year. We had a great weekend. It's the expectations, it's the hope, it's the preparing for what's coming next. Big thanks to our friend Peter, who helped us out last week with his draft prep. With him, we tagged him as a guest. We brought in some new followers on Twitter. The NFL's schedule is going to be announced in about 2 weeks. We'll be back for that. Then it's kind of a long off season. We'll see what happens as we get around to training camp and things like that. But any final thoughts on the draft and what's coming up next?
Lots of draft picks. Hope springs eternal. As I said before, you don't win the Super Bowl with the draft, but luck favors the prepared. And I think that Brian Gutekunst and Packers, they overloaded on offense. I think there's going to be great competition in the preseason this year, in training camp. I think there's going to be a lot of excitement. Things are new, things are unknown, and I'm hoping that the Packers get their fair share of national games, although this is going to be kind of we'll see what happens if they're going to get as many without Aaron Rodgers. But I think they're a young team, but they're an exciting team with some veteran leadership, and looking forward to see what Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love can do in the upcoming season with all these new draft picks.
Hope and potential is clearly the theme for this team. It's the theme for the draft in general, but we don't know what's going to happen with this team. We don't know what is going to happen with the players that we have on this team. It's going to make training camp more exciting than it's been in recent years. It's going to make the preseason games actually potentially interesting for the first time in years. And as the season moves along, we're not going to know exactly how things are going to develop. And the absence of predictability in the season is something that should make Packers fans excited at one fundamental level, and that we know where we want to get to. We know that some of these players are going to be able to contribute, or at least we hope that some of these players are going to be able to contribute to us getting there. And we've just got to figure out who are going to be those players that are going to be the stars of the future. And the future starts now for the Green Bay Packers.
Looking forward to it. Like I said, we'll be back in a couple of weeks for the schedule release. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit subscribe, leave a comment. You can always find the GBC podcast at Green Bay Chat. That's all one word. We are on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and Spotify. Facebook, it's the GBC podcast, Green Bay Chat. And may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Good night.